Hello class. This week in reading The Hate U Give, I'm going to be pairing a poem with that assignment. So the poem is by Tupac. So if you're into rap, you may know the poem. And it is called The Rose That Grew from Concrete. So you're going to be pairing that with The Hate U Give, right? And making those connections and those different things that we talked about with our close reading. Well, looking at a poem looks a little different, right? It's structured differently. There's different ways to interpret poetry rather than prose, as in a narrative or nonfiction, right? So all these different types of genres that we look at have different ways to approach them. So the way that you're going to approach the poem that I'm going to give you to read is through this graphic organizer, okay? And so this is called Let's Do the Twist. And using this twist, right, kind of funny like a dance move, acronym is going to allow you, maybe it will seem a little bit easier to remember twist than to just remember all these terms, right? So T is going to be your title, W's what's it about, I imagery, S style and structure, and T for theme. Okay, so these are all the things that you pull out when you read a poem. And then when we meet with our class together on conferencing on Friday, we will do another assignment that goes with the poem, and we'll do that as a class that will come directly from the notes you take here, right? So this just says poetry analysis notes. So a little bit more informal, just taking down what you are noticing about the poem. So I'm just gonna walk through what each of those different boxes will mean, what is expected of you in each of those boxes of the twist organizer. So the T for title is going to be, before you read the poem, you need to reflect on the title, right? So some poems don't have titles. And in that case, you'll have to do a bit more questioning, a bit more searching. And you could say, not having a title sometimes is a stylistic choice. It's a part of that structure that an author chooses to do when they write poems. The poem that we're looking at does have a title, right? So you're going to be looking at that title and you're going to be making inferences and predictions and kind of before you even read the poem about what this could be about. And that's what you're going to put in that box. What's it about? After you've read the poem once or twice, you would be able to paraphrase each stanza in your own words. You should be able to say, this is what it means to me by breaking it down, right? So not necessarily looking at the whole poem and saying, I know what it means, but maybe each line makes a little bit more sense to you, right? As you go through the poem itself. So that way, what's it about? What's the big picture here? You'll be able to find that out through each of the stanzas. Now, stanzas is where the poem is broken up into those little sections, right? So I like to say that a stanza is in comparison to a paragraph, while the line, right, each line is within the stanza is more like the sentence, where prose would have like a paragraphs and sentence structure versus lines and stanzas in poetry. Okay, so kind of make those comparisons. And maybe you did some poetry in 8th grade, I'm not sure, so maybe this is a review to you, but if not, then a good thing that I'm gonna discuss it so you can have that knowledge. So after you write what it's about, then you would move on to I, imagery. And imagery is where we have this figurative language and where we have the words and the choices that the author makes to make us have this picture in our minds, right? What gives us this image in our mind? So think image, imagery, picture, vision. And so there you would write what figurative language is being used to help create mood and tone. And you should be able to interpret some of the meaning by what language the author is using. So this could be like metaphor, simile, personification, some of those things that we talked about in class when we did the close reading, right? So think about that craft and structure. That's kind of the same thing you would do with imagery, the imagery section of this with poem. Then the style and structure, you're going to be again, looking at that structure of the poem, right, versus what you did with your reading last week. So the structure and the graphical elements are purposeful and they're meant to add meaning to a text. You should be able to note and interpret some of the elements that are used there, you know. So when I talk about structure, think about format, right? So we look at poems and sometimes they look a lot different. Sometimes words are like set off from one another. Sometimes we have this rhyme scheme. Sometimes we have punctuation that's different, maybe an exclamation mark here and a comma down in another line. And so all of those things, I mean, poems are sometimes so short. Sometimes they're longer if it's like an epic or something, but the poem that we're looking at is pretty short, but it's packed full with so much meaning. And even those little things, choices like the punctuation, the capitalization, and the use of white space or spacing really adds to the emotion and the understanding of what the author is trying to say, okay? And in this case, it's Tupac. So maybe a lot of times when you're doing poetry or reading anything, you can kind of look at who the author is and where they're coming from, right? So if you know anything about rap, I honestly don't really know. I mean, I probably know some songs if I heard them, but he was well known in the hip hop rap industry, but in some forms, rap and music, to me, I like to pair those together with poetry, right? So kind of thinking about where maybe Tupac had come from, you know, who he was, might add some understanding to what he's trying to say in the poem. Which then moves us into the T, which is theme. So theme is a universal truth, right? The message, just as we talked about with the close reading. What is our big picture here, right? What connections can we make? What lesson are we trying to learn from this poem? So then in that section, you would justify how the theme statement is true. So you would come up with a theme statement such as like never judge a book by its cover. That's not what it is with this poem, but that's a pretty usual theme that is comes up a lot in, you know, reading and just in life, right? That's just something to live by. So if that was our theme, what you would do in that box is put that theme statement and then justify what that, you know, why you came up with that theme, right? So using everything you've talked about with the title, what's it about, the imagery, the structure, that all of that is going to be put together to tell me what the overlying theme is of the poem, okay? So those are going to be your poetry analysis notes. It's going to look like this. You're going to fill those in for me, and I'll have this posted as well for you to see what you need to be filling in. After that, you would submit that to me, and then on Friday, we will, on our conference call, I'll have another worksheet that you'll do, and so maybe you can have it printed, or maybe you could just be writing on a sheet of paper, or whatever works best for you, or typing on something else, because I know you have your iPad, so I don't want to be confusing there, but I think it will be beneficial if we could do that one together. And so that one, I mean, I could just show you what that one's going to look like, but you are going to be using your notes that you'll be taking on that graphic organizer, right, to kind of get those thoughts, using that twist strategy, right, get those thoughts compartmentalized, kind of like, okay, this is what these are, and then that way we could better do an actual poetry analysis where we would answer these questions, okay? And so you won't we're going to go over these together as a class. So I'd hope in the conference that you'll be able to answer some of those and participate with the class. But so I think that's really good, and I think that it's important that we do this poem. One, so we're looking at these different genres, and two, we're pulling in different texts to make connections to the novel and to our characters. All right, so good luck with that, and I'll see you in our conference call.